Welcome to Emerging Franchise Brands, the podcast that introduces you to the visionary founders of America's fastest growing franchise opportunities. We'll also hear from industry pros as they share insights on what it really takes to achieve the elusive milestone of 100 plus locations. I am your host, Frank Fumey, founder of I9 Sports, and my 20-year journey from inception to acquisition has given me a unique perspective on how to succeed in franchising. Join me as we welcome today's guest. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Emerging Franchise Brands podcast. On today's show, I have the president of the Milkshake Factory, Dan Reese. Dan, how are you?
I'm well. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being on. All right, so Milkshake Factory. You guys have quite the illustrious history, but why don't you share with the audience first what you guys do?
Yeah, so we actually started as a chocolate shop at heart. So it was our founders, our fourth generation chocolatiers, and Milkshake Factory was technically born out of a rebranding their mom's little retail storefront chocolate shop. If you're in the chocolate business and it's not Valentine's Day, Easter, or holiday, it can be a tough business to be in. So sales were essentially zero in the summer, and then Dana, our founder, again fourth generation chocolatier, part of her college project was, yeah, what if we started scooping milkshakes in mom's chocolate shop? And, with them being fourth generation chocolatiers, they're absolutely obsessed with product quality. So, no surprise that the milkshakes they made were fantastic and, huge consumer hit. And they kind of realized like, hey, maybe we're onto something with these milkshakes. So they kind of slowly morphed from all chocolate and no milkshakes to majority milkshakes and a little bit of chocolate. So really the soul of Milkshake Factory is a chocolate shop, and we still have chocolate offerings to this day and make some chocolate in-house. But that's how Milkshake Factory started. So, it's mostly milkshakes. We've got a little bit of sundaes and then chocolate as well, and then we also have some dairy-free milkshakes, but it's a pretty focused menu, and we try to really execute on what we do best.
That's fantastic. Started in 1914, and then Milkshake Factory in 2008, and now more recently, now you just got into franchising. So if my numbers are correct and updated, so you have 10 company-owned locations. You've awarded since August of 2023, I believe, 60 franchises.
Yep, that's correct.
With the first couple opening, the first one will be opening this May 2024.
Yep, you got it. Yeah, so it's been, as an emerging brand, it's always, it's exciting, but a little nerve wracking when you go out to franchise and you never know for sure how the market's going to react, sure. Right? So we had a lot of very sophisticated franchise folks that came on and said, "Hey, this is super buttoned up. I've never seen something that, this ready this early," which was flattering. But again, you still never know until you go out to market. So the response that we've seen here over the last 7 months has been very rewarding and very exciting. And we're trying to really focus on what I call responsible growth. So, we're bringing on great operators in great markets. We have turned away a fair amount of folks who are otherwise qualified because, this is a long-term thing, and we're really betting on these franchisees being successful. That's obviously our entire business model. So trying to navigate, there's no secret that franchisors have to grow to make the numbers work.
Sure.
But we're also trying to be very responsible and mindful of that growth trajectory to make sure we can deliver on, what we've promised. And like you said, our first 3 franchise stores will be open in, May, June. First one will likely be in Metro Salt Lake City, and then Durham, North Carolina, and Ann Arbor, Michigan will be the first 3.
So you told me before we got on the started the show here, who is that Ann Arbor franchisee?
Yeah, he's a great guy. We like him a lot. No, it's actually me. So, I live in Ann Arbor. Franworth, our franchise development equity partners, are based out of Ann Arbor. Ann Arbor is a great market. I'm obviously very biased. So on one hand, I didn't want anyone else to take it because I really believe in the business and I really believe in the market. But on the other hand, so it is real money, and I genuinely believe in the return. But I would say, arguably, even more importantly, it's about, I'm very mindful of something I call detached leadership, right? Mm-hmm. Where sometimes you have executives in their kind of executive bubble, and they don't really know what's going on where things happen. So in our case, it's obviously the stores. If it's, a home service business, it's at the project site. If it's a grocery business, it's in the grocery store, et cetera. So I think by opening up that store in my hometown and being personally responsible for it, I'm going to know really quickly what's working, what's not, what challenges we have. And, I've been very mindful of building and fostering community among our franchisees. And I'm in it. Like it's a peer group effectively. Right. And I think that they like that, right? Because they don't feel like they're alone, and we're all kind of in it together. So it's kind of a cool dynamic that we're building behind the scenes.
Nice. Dan, so what's your background? How long have you been with the company?
Yeah, so I've been working with the Edwards family for coming up on a decade now, which is kind of crazy to say. So, they're the fourth generation chocolatiers. I'm the more traditional business guy. So, supply chain undergrad, supply chain consulting for a couple of years, worked for a private equity portfolio company in their strategy group for a handful of years, then went to Duke University full time to get an MBA. And after Duke, went to Heinz North America to in their brand management group. And that's really where I did that because I wanted to learn how to run a business. So that brand management group, it's technically a marketing role, but you have full P&L responsibility. So did everything from big product launches to Super Bowl commercials, got to run brands like Heinz Ketchup and big brands like that. Partway through my tenure there is when 3G Capital came in, the pretty invasive Brazilian private equity firm. We took that company, took Heinz, it was a public company, excuse me, and we took it private. And I worked my way up through that organization, ended up being the youngest global partner of 3G in Heinz. So that whole experiment was some very experience-rich years. And then in 2015, I was part of the small team that helped integrate Kraft and Heinz during that merger, using the term loosely. But that what is now known as Kraft Heinz, and that's now a publicly traded company. So my last job there was leading their $2 billion condiments portfolio. And I think a lot of great people there. And I ended up leaving. I was the first person ever to leave that partnership group because I think it's really hard to grow a business the way I wanted to grow it, being a publicly traded company, especially in a very tumultuous atmosphere where there's so much pressure and all of Wall Street is looking at you and they care a whole bunch about Q1 earnings and Q2 earnings. And that's the game, right? Sure. And everyone, myself included, is highly, highly incentivized to hit those numbers and hit annual numbers. And it's a very difficult, sometimes even impossible way to grow a business for the long term.
Yeah.
That's my own personal opinion. So it was kind of just at odds with how I wanted to run a business. So that's when I met the Edwards family. They actually were just leaving very prominent careers in the George Bush administration in the White House. So they've got amazing stories flying around Air Force One and, Hurricane Katrina and 9/11 Ground Zero and all of that. So they left their very prominent careers in literally the Oval Office to come back to the very small family chocolate business. And then I brought a whole bunch of people over with me from Kraft Heinz. We really grew that chocolate business on the back of primarily Costco from 0 to 50 million in revenue over the course of 6 years. So we were on the Inc. 5000 fastest growing companies in America for 6 consecutive years. So we had a good run at the chocolate business, consumer product goods, again, mostly Costco, but still, Target and Kroger and big grocery customers. We have since exited that business, and Milkshake Factory was a totally separate entity. During most of that run was just mom's chocolate storefront that was rebranded Milkshake Factory. So it was one very little humble storefront. And we can get into the Milkshake Factory story in a minute, but really the inflection point of Milkshake Factory was when 2016 is when PNC Bank was building their new global headquarters downtown Pittsburgh, like this big, gorgeous building. And they wanted something fun and local at their ground level retail. They just didn't want another Starbucks or whatever. So they came to us, said, hey, we'd love a Milkshake Factory. And we were in the throes of growing this chocolate business. And we said, I mean, thank you. That's flattering. But like, no. We turned them down, I don't know, 10 times probably.
Wow.
And then the deal, the rent number kept going down. And then we were like, okay. So we kind of begrudgingly, kind of got serious about Milkshake Factory, for lack of a better term, in terms of, hiring architects and rebranding and having a much more, I would say, sophisticated and intentional, thought and attention to the brand. And that opened in 2016. And again, I mean, the store was way too big and we spent way too much money and the operation wasn't efficient, and I can go on and on.
Sure.
But on the consumer side, I mean, just absolute home run from day one. I mean, the lines were insane. And that was kind of our big aha moment of, wait a minute, like I've led a lot of big brands in my career,
Uh-huh.
and I've never seen the consumer reaction like I have to Milkshake Factory. And that was like, okay, like maybe we're onto something with this Milkshake Factory thing. So
Right.
that was kind of that whole PNC thing. And that store, to this day is still one of our best stores. So that was our inflection point when we were kind of begrudgingly got serious about Milkshake Factory and then realized, maybe we had something.
Wow. Dan, I'm blown away by your background, first of all. Super impressive. And that your experience is incredibly, I mean, it's so valuable as you're taking on this franchise venture now. Most franchise companies, whether you partner up or not, with whether it's part of a portfolio or you're just a founder that's bootstrapping it, you're kind of learning on the fly for the most part. But you've taken such an incredible experience on the consumer side, and you're really poised for Milkshake Factory to do just phenomenal.
Yeah, that's the hope. We try to be very, even, we've grown our corporate stores, which we can talk about, to 10. We've learned a whole bunch. Our team is extremely tenured. We knew we were not ready for franchising at store 4 or store 6 or even really store 8.
Mm-hmm.
It was store 10 is kind of the franchise prototype store. But even then, that's great and have these 10 successful corporate stores. But we at least were smart enough to know that entering into the world of franchising, it's complicated, and there's a lot of very easy ways to screw it up that are unforeseen to people
Sure.
who don't know. So that's when, we talked to pretty much every Fran Dev company in the country, and we're fortunate enough to find Franworth, who are our partners. They're all wonderful people. It's more or less a shared resource model for those who don't know. But all of their executives have scaled brands from 0 to 500 plus. They've been CEOs of big franchise organizations, in-house legal counsel, in-house operations. I mean, you name it, they have all that franchise expertise. So we're the business people. We know everything there is to know about running a Milkshake Factory and running a business. And then they layer in a lot of the franchise specific expertise. And that's where, I think, there's different strategies as you think about, retaining equity or giving equity. But for us, we really believe in this business, and we want to maximize our chances at being successful,
Sure.
whatever that ends up meaning. And I have the personal belief is that, even if that means, giving up equity, it's getting the right people at the table. And that's exactly what we've done, because even, we're now a year plus in. If we try to go at this alone, even with our, I would think, very sophisticated team, we would have struggled.
Yeah.
So
Well, franchising,
it's hard.
yeah,
It's hard.
yeah. Franchising is a different animal for sure. I'm sure you're familiar with some of the stats, like 84% of all franchisors never get to 100 units.
Yep.
And that's not even saying whether they're profitable or not, right? Those that do get to the 100 units and being royalty, sufficient. Since you are new into franchising, I'd like to kind of steer our conversation, since so many of our audience members are listening and are thinking of maybe franchising their concept. I kind of want to get in your head here, because you mentioned earlier you weren't ready at 4, you weren't ready at 6, you got to 10 and went, okay, now we're ready to franchise. So let's go back. Let's go back in time. You have 4 company owned, you have 6 company owned. What was missing that you said, we're not ready to franchise this thing?
Yeah, I think it's really all about, for us as we're in food and beverage, but we're very simple food and beverage.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it took a long time to get there, right? So like, at first at that PNC store I mentioned in 2016, it was a whole bunch of employees scooping ice cream, and it was very inefficient from a labor model and operational efficiency, speed of service, all of those key metrics. So that's where, our VP of operations, that's still one of our key employees to this day, he has a franchising background, actually in pizza. And he came on in 2016, and to his credit, I don't know how he didn't just do a 180 and walk right back out the door, but he stayed on. And honestly, it's just 8-9 years of just tweaking and optimizing, and we completely reformulated our ice cream, make our ice cream in-house. We work with the head of the Penn State University Creamery, who's arguably the most knowledgeable person in the world on ice cream, for 6 months to have our ice cream recipe that is specifically designed to be blended in milkshakes. So there's so much nuance of how you make a world-class milkshake. So we have to deliver that on the quality side, but then you also have to deliver that on the operational efficiency side. So, go to your local fancy ice cream parlor and order a milkshake. It'll probably take them 5 minutes or maybe even more, right? And we can spin milkshakes in 30 to 45 seconds, right? So that line can be out the door on Saturday, and we can get through it very, very quickly. And then it's also very standardized. That 17-year-old employee that's working for you in the summer, it's extremely formulaic, right? Just like, a lot of the big franchise brands have nailed, specifically in food. You can't, your Starbucks latte at location A can't be different than location B, right? And we have nailed that, where, even the brand new, all of our candidates at our discovery days, we send them back a house and have them make a milkshake, and they can make a world-class milkshake in a couple minutes. Now, it doesn't mean they're perfect, but it's very, very standardized. So that was a big, being able to check both of those boxes on quality and operational efficiency. And then also, there's a lot of detail when it comes to capital efficiency and layouts and square footage and equipment of how do you get these things open for 100K cheaper? Or, hey, can you make this work in 1350 square feet instead of 1550, right?
It's a huge difference. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a huge difference, right? In terms of build out upfront capital. And then also, obviously rent is a function of square footage, and we're not a restaurant. We don't have huge seating areas. So how do we still do right by the consumer? And they have some seating, but there doesn't need to be 40 seats in our stores, and then have them be 2,200 square feet. So, that franchise prototype store that we opened last March, coming up on a year ago, it's still in a brand new construction center. Revenue hasn't even really taken yet, and it's already, as a percentage of revenue, our most profitable store in the chain.
What's a ideal footprint size for you guys?
Yeah, so our stated range is about 1,350 to 1,600 is kind of the sweet spot. My Ann Arbor store is going to be a little bigger than that. A couple of reasons for that, but we can flex a little bit on either way. But that's about the sweet spot in most markets that we found.
Okay, great. So let's go all the way up to, fast forward to when you ultimately decided we're going to franchise.
Yeah, so we had those 10 corporate stores, and COVID was in the rearview mirror. We opened 8 of our stores pre-COVID. Obviously, COVID was not fun for anybody in brick and mortar retail, but we got through it. And I think it made us stronger. It made us look into our labor model. We realized we could actually operate much more efficiently than we thought possible. We can talk about that if you'd like. But then we since opened 2 more stores. And we're not a type of business that can be on every street corner, right? So we have 10 stores in Pittsburgh, which is, it's a decent sized city, but it's not Dallas or anything crazy. So we're bumping up against about what I would call market saturation in the Pittsburgh market with 10. So really the decision was, do we want to own the 10 stores and just have that be the business? Which, again, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But, myself and our owners, and honestly, all of our employees, were like, I really believe in this business. Like, we have to kind of see this through. And we've turned down a bunch of other opportunities just because that's how much we believe in it. So you're saying, okay, we believe in it and we want to expand beyond Pittsburgh. Then there's kind of a fork in the road of, do you want to expand via corporate development, or do you want to franchise? And corporate development, again, there's plenty of case studies of businesses that have expanded brilliantly doing that. I look at like what Culver's has done, just methodical and systematic, and hats off to them. I think that as an example, that they've done it, but it's a much slower growth, and it's also very, very capital intensive, right? Even if you think about bringing on a partner, like the valuation of the 10 stores, like the math just doesn't quite work unless you're taking, literally probably a multi-decade view of growth. And again, that doesn't mean that's bad, but that isn't really what we wanted to do. So that's when we started getting serious. We spent most of 2022 just learning about franchising and what it meant. And what we realized was, we didn't build this brand to franchise. But what we kind of stumbled into was, we have the perfect brand for franchising, right? Because no one's really doing what we're doing. It's way harder than people think in terms of all that we've learned over the last decade. And we can talk about that. And it's super scalable and, very, as you start to have multi-unit, there's a lot of efficiencies on labor. So you start checking all these boxes, it's fairly capital efficient. It's not that complicated relative to most F&B. There's no big hoods. There's no commercial kitchens. Some of that stuff that can be less than fun in food and beverage.
Sure.
So yeah, we started checking all these boxes and said, hey, you know what? Like this is starting to feel right. And that's when we talked to a whole bunch of folks. And our big, I would say, moment of validation was in, later in 2022, we had all the Franworth executives, and, some of them were some pretty heavy hitters. I mean, one of them, he owns over 1,000 personally units of F&B concepts. So, they all came to Pittsburgh, and we were kind of like, oh man, like these guys are going to laugh us out of the room. We're not ready. Like, we're going to get, they're awesome guys, but they're going to politely decline. And then when they all came in and said, wow, like we've never seen something this buttoned up this early in this, like we want in, they get like 300 to 400 brands that come across their desk every year, and they'll do maybe 1 or 2 deals. So that when they said, hey, like we want to hold hands and do this with you guys, that was like when we said, okay, that's just great. Sometimes you need a little bit of external validation just to kind of give you that confidence, because, we believe in ourselves, but we also don't want to be naive. So that was our big, I would say, nudge or maybe shove into the deep end of franchising, but very grateful for the Franworth team and everything they've done for us.
That's awesome. And clearly you've captured the, the attention of people looking to buy a franchise, since you've awarded 60 since just August of 2023. So again, going back to our audience of folks that are emerging founders, that something like that kind of excites people of what's possible. And on the other side of the coin, it's also scary that there are many emerging franchisors that should definitely not award 60 locations in 6 months. So I'm curious if you wouldn't mind sharing, Dan, like, how did you guys know that you were ready to scale that quickly so early on in the process?
It really comes down to resources, right? So it's both intellectual resources and financial resources. So to all you potential emerging franchisors out there, it is very capital intensive to do it right. And if you try, and this is my own personal opinion, where you have to build out a team, systems, it's a whole support network, because if you try to bootstrap it, and again, companies have done that, but you're basically putting your initial franchisees, the folks that believe in you the most, that are arguably taking the most risk, they're the guinea pigs, right? They're going to work through all of the kinks. And that doesn't feel right to me, right? So we are investing heavily. And when I mean heavily, like well over 7 figures, right? So like when I see emerging franchisors say, I'm willing to put 50 grand to franchising, you're not ready, right?
No, right.
Like you're just not. And that's okay. We weren't ready either, right? Sure. So you have to either have the capital or have access to capital, and then really have a very robust network of support. Like we're structuring this entire business around supporting our franchisees. So, we work with the Rep 'em team and the Build 'em team, and they do all of our Fran Dev, and then they do real estate and construction team. So they will help white glove all of our franchisees from site selection to opening their doors. And anyone who's done that, especially in brick and mortar retail, it's complicated, right? And there's big dollars at stake, and there's huge mistakes that you can make. We know because we've made them when it comes to negotiating commercial leases and GC bid leveling and, permitting and health department and on and on and on and on it goes. So it's all about that support. And then we are aggressively building out our team, ahead of, we have 6 right now, and we don't even have a single unit open. And we have the entire Franworth team. So, we have probably a team of 15 to 20 people that their sole job is to support franchisees, and we don't have a single unit open yet, right? So when you think about, oh, how on earth would this take 7 figures? Like that's how, right? So I think both capital is a massive deal that people underestimate.
Right.
And then if you underestimate it and you run out of it, then everyone, franchisor, franchisees, everyone's in a very, very bad spot. And then intellectual capital, meaning, do you have people at the table that have the appropriate expertise to be able to support franchisees and help them through the process and everything that goes along with it? So that's, we've been very, very intentional. It kind of feels like an army of support that even for our first 3 stores, like you could argue is overkill, but it's not, right? Like we're playing the long game, and we're trying to do this the right way, but it is, to make no mistake, it is very, very expensive to do it right, in my opinion.
Yeah. And the huge advantage you have, you said it in so many words, is you have the bench strength that most franchisors starting out don't have. Yeah,
exactly. And that's kind of where, it is, there's a lot of different strategies and ways to do it. But yeah, like you said, if you're trying to bootstrap a franchise organization, definitely do not award 60 units in 6 months. You could go, you could dip your toe in the water, and there are different strategies, and it's certainly not binary, but do the work to understand what it means is my very strong recommendation. Because if you just hop in and throw a tab on your website and spend a little bit of money for an FDD, like that's not going to cut it.
No, that's not franchising responsibly, as we say.
Yeah.
What is the investment range and how long does it take for build out?
Yeah, so our item 7 shows, it's about 460 on the low end in terms of pre-opening expense, all the way up to just shy of 700. So, a lot of variables in there based on market. Square footage is a really, really big one. So, that includes everything: working capital, franchise fee, et cetera. So that's the range that we'll operate in. And then in terms of timing, it's, I think 9 to 10 months from signing FA is about what we tell people. Now, a big variable in that is site selection. So anyone out there who's currently looking for commercial real estate can probably relate. Some of these markets are pretty tight, right? And I tell everyone site selection is the one thing you cannot screw up, right? Like, you can hire a bad GM or you can screw up the marketing campaign. Like, you can fix all of that. But if you sign a 10, potentially 20-year lease in a bad spot, it's a big problem.
Yeah.
So I practice urgency with action, but patience with decisions when it comes to site selection to our franchisees. So most of our franchisees, they're in site selection right now, and it's a roller coaster, right? Just like anything in real estate, you kind of fall in love with a space and it falls through, or the landlord ghosts you, or you name it. Or sometimes the sea just parts and you find that beautiful space right away.
Right.
And then everyone else was like, how did you do that? But it really matters to get it right. So I am mindful not to put too much pressure on franchisees saying you have to find a spot right now, because we're in this for the long term. And if you zoom out in 5-10 years, we're going to be pretty happy that we waited an extra month and a half to find the better spot, right? So it's not quite that simple, but it is, if kind of the standard process from site selection to signing your lease to build out to working towards opening is, 9 months is a decent rule of thumb, and we will have some that'll probably be a little bit under that, and some will for sure be longer than that.
Sure. Would you say some of the criteria as an ideal location?
Yeah. So the good news is, a lot of people like milkshakes. So, in Pittsburgh, we have urban stores downtown. We have suburban stores. We have a store at the University of Pittsburgh, adjacent to their college campus. So people always say, who's your target consumer? I'm like, well, which store is it? So, families, elderly people, college kids, like, we do well everywhere, which is awesome. Where a lot of brands have it's females age 35 to 49, and that can work too. But thankfully that's not us. So, answer is it depends, but we do pretty well in affluent suburbs. We are a premium brand. We are not the cheapest milkshake out there. We are the best milkshake out there, but, in certain, lower income areas is probably not the best spot for us. And for us, it's really about kind of where the action is, right? Where the spot of the community is. We love restaurant co-tenancy for obvious reasons. And we love being close to colleges or the big high school, movie theaters, sports fields, outdoor malls, wherever people are, because we're partly a destination where people will go out of their way, put the family in the car and come to Milkshake Factory. But people will also kind of, be at that center where stuff is and see the Milkshake Factory and come in. So, we always joke that there's a Capitol Grill across the street from our downtown Pittsburgh location, and they don't sell any dessert. So everyone comes across to the street to us. So, we're friends with them. It's okay. But
you've killed their cheesecake sales over at Capitol Grill.
Have. They still do okay. I
and the creme brulee.
Yeah. So, we give them some free shakes. It's fine. But it does. There is no such thing as a perfect location, but the name Milkshake Factory works incredibly hard for us. So I wear this jacket that says Milkshake Factory on it. I mean, literally, I was in the Apple store yesterday. I had a crowd of like 4 or 5 people around me asking, what is that? And they were just so excited, which is kind of funny in a way, right? It's so ridiculous. But there's something about the name Milkshake Factory that I don't know if there's like a nostalgia to it.
Yeah,
or
it does.
Fun to talk about it.
Feels that way.
I can't quite articulate it, and it's different for everybody, but there's something to it, I promise you. Even when people have never heard of the name Milkshake Factory, like, I can promise you, we could come into your market and put up a sign, and a big exterior sign or big coming soon graphics that says coming soon Milkshake Factory. And people would be really excited because and they say, well, when's that milkshake place opening? Right. And so, yeah, that even just point being, high visibility does well for us because people in a half a second know exactly what we sell. And then what we sell is pretty fun and interesting to most people. So
Right.
we just want to make sure, as long as we get on people's radar, we usually do pretty well.
Yeah, I get a feel absolutely like nostalgia, like turn of the century, early 20th century sort of vibes, right?
Yep. Yeah. And that's, I mean, in our logo is EST 1914. So,
Right.
we're kind of a modern twist on that old classic. So,
Yeah.
we're not an old timey chocolate shop like some other brands out there. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. But, but we're also not zany. And it's also very important. Like, we are proudly not trendy. I think trends, to everyone out there in franchising, be careful. Not saying trends are bad if they're going to stick, but there's been many instances of trends in a big gold rush into that hot concept or hot trend or whatever it is. And you need, especially if you're in brick and mortar signing a lease, back to my 10 to 20 year comment, you need to know that a business that you were buying into has staying power, right? Okay, it's hot now. Is it going to be just as successful in 10 years, 20 years? So that's where, we're not trendy. We're not some flash in the pan. We might not even have the highest AUVs out of every concept, but like it's just steady, solid growth. And, we plan on being here for many, many decades. And you can look at other businesses that do chocolate, and they've been around for half a century. And I think that's a lot more than most brands can say in F&B.
True. All right, Dan, what does training and support look like? Can you elaborate on training a little bit?
Yeah, so very robust training program. So we have dedicated training resources both on the Milkshake Factory team and on the Franworth team. So basically training, there's really three buckets of it. So the first is business training that is in person, that's in Ann Arbor. We spend 3 very comprehensive days about all things business related, right? It's financials, it's P&L, it's KPIs, it's hiring, it's culture, marketing, you name it. So that's 3 days. And then we have a very comprehensive operations training, and that's in Pittsburgh, at least for now. That's 6 days, and that's all about how do you actually run a milkshake factory, right? How are you making shakes? How are you receiving inventory? How are you, all the details of actually running this, the 4 walls of the store. And then we also have a very comprehensive learning management system where we digitize all the resources. So think of it almost like as a YouTube of training, right? Like no one's going to retain all that information in those 3 or 6 days. Wait a minute. How do I work the ice cream machine again? Like, they can go back and that knowledge is all there. So there's a heavy amount of upfront training. Then we also have resources that will go out to help with opening and training, because anyone who's opened F&B concepts or really any business knows that that's it's a pretty wild time.
Yeah.
And then we also have, franchise business managers that their sole job is to be the first point of contact for franchisees. So some franchisee has an issue, even a small one, they can call that FBM and they can get answers very, very quickly. Then some of those questions have to get escalated, but it's all about kind of very robust support for the franchisees. And then the good news is that, again, the business is pretty simple, that once you get it, it's pretty trainable, and then the learning curve isn't quite as steep as maybe some other businesses out there.
Great. All right. Tell me about your ideal franchise owner.
Yeah, so that's been the most fun part, is just talking to folks from around the country, different markets, different career backgrounds. It's super fun for me and for us to go through that process. I think our ideal is an existing F&B owner who is looking to grow their portfolio. Okay. Where, they have maybe different food, and it doesn't necessarily have to be F&B, but, it's ideal because it's a little different animal, where they've done something in food and beverage, ideally multi-unit, and they've started to build scale, and they're looking to grow and or diversify their portfolio. Every time that those folks come into Milkshake Factory, they're like, oh, I can do this, right? Like they have a lot of confidence, and that in turn gives me a lot of confidence based on how simple it is. And some of these other businesses that they're involved in, right, I'll look and say, hey, if you can run that, you can for sure run this, right? So it doesn't mean we're exclusively talking to those folks, but at the end of the day, we're looking for great operators in great markets. So I think those existing F&B franchisees, I love those folks. I'll bet on them almost all day, but it's not exclusive. Like there's other folks, of our 60 units, we have 21 franchisees, I believe. So our average is about a 3-unit deal.
Okay.
So you get some nice efficiencies when you go multi-unit, but we have awarded single units as well. And for those type of folks, I would say the greener franchise buyers that are looking to, take a step into entrepreneurship or whatever it may be, the big thing I look for there is entrepreneurial grit, right? Like are you willing to roll up your sleeves and do the work? And anyone who says the term passive income is immediately ejected from the system.
Gone.
Like, not a thing. So if everyone out there, I don't care what business you're talking about, if you hear the words passive income, someone is lying to you. But so be careful with that. But I think if someone, and what I mean by entrepreneurial grit is like, it's almost like we're not going to fail. Like, we're going to work as hard as we need to. We will learn, we will follow the process, we will do what it takes to build culture, take care of our customers, and build this business. I love that. And I will, not everybody has it, right? Some people think, oh, milkshakes are fun, I'll do that. You're like, okay, well, that's a good start,
Right.
but it's not, that only takes you so far, right? So, we have a pretty diverse group of franchisees, from single unit up to a couple who have signed on for 6. We're not doing huge deals of 20 unit deals and things like that. I think even our very sophisticated operators will say start with 6 and you prove yourself, and then it's very scalable and you can grow from there. So we're trying to be very thoughtful about, who we bring on and how we grow this business.
Sure. Dan, do you have a schedule if I was going to open a 3-pack on what your expectations are?
Yeah. So our development agreements are essentially 1 per year. So your 3-pack would be 3 years. So you'd buy that territory. You'd essentially put up a giant proverbial fence around that territory for 3 years. And, we build those territories off of contiguous zip codes. And again, the people early to emerging brands, they get the best territory, right? So
Absolutely.
as people think about risk, if you can find the right brand that's emerging and get in early with the right territories, there's a lot of instances of people doing very well in that situation. So yeah, it's 1 store per year is the deal.
Okay, fair enough.
And some will go faster, but we did 6 in 18 months, so we know you can go faster. But that feels, I would say, doable, for lack of a better term.
Right. Okay. So tell me about your vision for the company. So have you guys kind of plotted out how many milkshake factories you think there will be in the United States?
Yeah. I mean, it's always a hard question. I know, we're not Starbucks, right? There's not going to be 10 or 20,000 milkshake factories. It's just simply not that kind of business. But, there's 5,000 Dairy Queens, right? And again, or whatever, the 4,000, some giant number. I think that's way too many for us, given, we're a little more premium. But, we'll look at other brands and kind of mapped out the country. I mean, we're still a lot of states not even looking at yet, right? We're trying to be pretty intelligent about where we grow, both in terms of building the brand and also from a supply chain perspective, right? Regional density is a big deal when it comes to supply chain and F&B. So, I've got a lot of interest in California, and I say, hey, like, hang tight for a little bit, right? We're not going out to California, no West Coast, a lot of the kind of the more far-reaching areas. It doesn't mean never, but we just can't do that right now. So I think that, like, time will tell, but it's probably somewhere in the 600 to 1,000 probably feels right. But that's way in the future, like market saturated type of thing. And again, we'll learn a bunch as we go, but I am mindful of territory creation that you want it, I can't say, okay, if we have 10 in Pittsburgh, like Dallas to come back to, there could be more than 10 in Dallas, right? Like that, we know that if there's 10 successful in Pittsburgh, now is the number in Dallas, is it 20 or is it 40? That's probably a little bit TBD, but I am conscious of, basically cannibalizing sales and putting too many milkshake factories into too tight of an area.
Right.
And then that hurts everybody, really. So that's kind of that balance that we're trying to find, where we try to keep them, reasonably spaced out and enable them to be the store of the community that, store A isn't poaching from store B, et cetera.
And what about the growth? Because you kind of mentioned regionally, are you guys looking primarily to stay in the Midwest and partially Northeast initially, or?
No.
So what are these pockets that are most excited about right now?
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the markets that I was probably, one of the markets I was most excited about out of the gate was Metro Salt Lake City, which is kind of a haven for a lot of sweets in this space. A lot of reasons for that. And we sold out Metro Salt Lake City in our first month and a half. So gone. 12 units, Metro Salt Lake, which again, it's possible maybe there's a couple others in the fringes, but essentially that's sold out, right? So that's a market I love. That's where and we have an amazing operator there. Our very first franchisee is actually my friend from Kraft Heinz. So we struck gold with him. He's a franchisor's dream for a first franchisee. So he's fantastic. He signed on for 6. He's going to absolutely crush it. I'm so excited for him. So that Salt Lake's a market we're really excited about. Now that ship has already sailed for everyone externally. And we're, all the markets you think of, right? So So, a market like Dallas, I've mentioned them like 4 times.
Mhm.
They're going to be a top market for us for obvious reasons. We've got some density building in Metro Phoenix, which is a market I love. Charlotte is a market we're getting a lot of density in. Atlanta,
Mhm.
all around Florida is also very positive. And then we're getting a fair amount of interest around kind of New York, New Jersey as well. So we've got a fair amount of franchisees in the New Jersey area, and then have some folks looking at New York. So there's kind of these pockets, if you will, where we're going to try to lean in. And then, Columbus, Ohio, I'll be in Ann Arbor, Michigan. So a little bit of Midwest, but we're going to have the map with these pockets of density. And as you look at or national food distributors, it's really a function of their distribution centers and efficiencies and getting cases through those DCs. So it doesn't necessarily have to be contiguous growth on a map like like an army advancing. It can be a little bit more about pockets in regional density, which is the approach that we're taking.
Dan, this is incredible. I think you guys are going to blow this thing up quickly. If someone was interested in learning more about the franchise opportunity, where would they go?
Yeah, so our brand new website is live as of a couple weeks ago. So milkshakefactory.com has all the family story. I joke that our prior website was homemade during COVID on Wix for $30. So we up, it was scrappy. It served us well, but it was time to grow up a little bit. So we actually had a real agency and did it for real. So yeah, new website is live. You can click on the franchise tab there. It's all the franchise development information around process, and there's a contact us form. So you can find us there. Milkshake Factory's on Instagram. You can find me personally on LinkedIn and Twitter. So LinkedIn is Dan Reese and Twitter is Dan Reese 21. I try to be pretty active out there. Just a great way to meet folks and kind of get the word out. Try to be super responsive when people who are interested reach out. So a lot of ways to find us.
Wow. Okay. Fantastic. Dan, I finish every podcast with a tip jar because the franchise community is so generous with sharing information. If I was that entrepreneur looking to franchise my concept, what would be a warning or tip that you'd give me before I jump in?
I would say do a bunch of work and talk to a bunch of people like myself and yourself and others who have done that at different, obviously you're well ahead. I'm not equating me to you, but I think talk to a lot of folks out there that have done it or are doing it, present tense. You will learn a whole bunch, and you'll find that the community is pretty generous with their time, and they want to help each other out. And I would never want to see someone go into being a franchisor not eyes wide open, and then they have unpleasant surprises and things like that. So just reach out, talk to folks. Like I promise, you'll learn a whole bunch, and then you can kind of reassess where you're at, and maybe you're ready and maybe you're not, and that's okay.
That's awesome. Dan, thanks so much for being on the show. I appreciate it, and I wish you all the best. I know you guys are going to absolutely explode.
Thanks. I appreciate it. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you for tuning into the Emerging Franchise Brands podcast. For additional insights, guest applications, and to stay connected, visit us at efbpodcast.com. The Emerging Franchise Brands podcast is for entertainment purposes only, and the views expressed do not necessarily represent those of Emerging Franchise Brands, its host Frank Fumey, or Emerging Franchise Group, LLC. Any discussed franchise or investment opportunity requires thorough investigation, obtaining proper disclosure documents, and expert consultation before making any investment decisions. The podcast and its host do not offer professional advice or endorsements, and they hold no responsibility for actions, representations, accuracy, or consequential damages related to the podcast content.